Schizophrenics, what is the scariest hallucination that you have ever experienced? Story 1. My friend in college was diagnosed with schizophrenia. One night we were hanging out in his dorm room around 11 p.m. or midnight, and he got up to go to the bathroom. He opened the door and stopped, staring into the empty hallway. Then he asked me to come to the door and tell him if something seemed off. I walked over and looked out, but didn't notice anything unusual and told him so. He asked if I could hear anything. I said no. He said he heard muffled crying or arguing coming from down the hall. He also said the hallway looked pitch black to him, even though it was actually fully lit. He insisted it wasn't just dim, it was completely dark. At this point, he was visibly shaking, and I was terrified because I had no idea he was dealing with a serious mental health condition. We were both on the verge of tears. I'm not even sure he knew he was sick at the time. I ended up walking him to the bathroom and stayed the night in his room because he said he could still hear someone crying in the hall. For the longest time, I thought he was just joking or trying to scare me. But shortly after that night, he started going to therapy and was prescribed medication. It turned out to be a terrifying and very real moment for both of us. Story 2. First off, I want to clarify that I have hallucinations categorized as psychosis rather than schizophrenia. They assign that diagnosis when your symptoms don't fully match or aren't severe enough for a standard classification. That being said, I've genuinely been so scared from some of my hallucinations that I lost control physically. I can't imagine how overwhelming it must be for people with more severe conditions. My scariest hallucination was also my first visual one. I was in 10th grade and had already been hearing voices for a while. So often, in fact, that I was starting to get used to the idea that I hear things others don't. I remember getting up from my desk to use the restroom, and as I stepped into the hallway, I saw a man with no face just standing there, facing me. At first, I thought I was just tired or seeing things, so I blinked a few times and shook my head. When I looked again, he was gone. The hallways were empty and silent. There was no way someone could have moved without me noticing. I went to the bathroom thinking it was strange but brushed it off, even joking to myself, now I'm seeing things too. Great. But when I got to the bathroom, he was there again, standing in the doorway. I stared for a second, more curious than scared, and thought maybe he was just wearing a mask. I asked him to move so I could get by. Right then, another student came out and asked who I was talking to. He walked right through the faceless man. I stood there speechless. The other kid looked at me weird and walked off. The faceless man stepped aside and I gave him the widest possible space as I entered the bathroom, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. Then a girl came in, and I started to tell her she was in the wrong bathroom. I'm male, for context. When I noticed she didn't have a face either. They both started walking toward me, and at that point, I was overwhelmed with fear. I rushed into a stall, shut the door, and broke down in tears. That's when I realized that something was seriously wrong. I didn't leave the stall until the staff came and talked me out. Those two faceless figures still show up now and then, even though I've graduated and moved away. They never say or do anything. They just appear. But that first encounter terrified me beyond words. Story 3. Snipers. One Friday evening, I was watching TV and happened to be playing with a flashlight that I had left on the coffee table. Suddenly, I found myself in a full-blown hallucination. I heard what sounded like a special forces team right outside the window, sneaking through my backyard. I flashed the light around the room, and they went quiet. I believed they thought the flashlight was mounted on a weapon. The next thing I knew, they were calling me outside like I was part of a SWAT situation. I was on my hands and knees on the porch in the middle of the night, pleading with them not to shoot me. I must have stayed out there for about 2 hours, my hands behind my head as I imagined the snipers growing more and more nervous. Eventually, in the hallucination, they decided they couldn't de-escalate the situation, and they shot me. I laid on the porch dead for several minutes before crawling back inside. I called my mom and told her that I had been shot and that special forces had taken me out. Of course, she didn't believe it, but stayed on the phone and helped calm me down. She convinced me to go to the ER and stayed on the line the whole time. I was still in full hallucination mode when I got there. While waiting, I imagined the special forces leader chatting with the nurse at the front desk, saying he knew I was there and was coming to get me. Thankfully, the doctor saw me first. He wasn't sure how to treat me, so he gave me 2 milligrams of Ativan and discharged me. I drove home still hallucinating and now a bit sedated. On the drive back, I saw all kinds of bizarre and unreal things. When I got home, the medication had mellowed everything out. The rest of the weekend was spent in a much calmer state, with hallucinations that felt more playful than threatening. But the fear I felt during those 2 hours with imaginary snipers, that's something I'll never forget. Story 4. I had a patient with Lewy body dementia. Not schizophrenia, but it caused horrific hallucinations. I was working the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my office was close to her room. She would scream and scream all night long. I would go sit with her and ask if something was scaring her. She saw people waiting in the shadows in the corner of her room. She heard them laughing, saw their faces contorting. She felt rats crawling up and down her body. She felt them crawling into her and hurting her, biting from the inside, then coming out of her eyes. She was still pretty with it, and you could have lucid conversations with her. She had a sense of humor like you wouldn't believe. She knew what she was experiencing were hallucinations, but that didn't make them any less real to her. Eventually, she stopped being able to discern what was real and what wasn't. She passed away a few months ago. I worked with her for 2 years and miss her every single day. But I'm grateful that she is no longer suffering. Story 5. I have been treated for schizoaffective disorder for most of my life, with a known family history. I take an antipsychotic and a mood stabilizer multiple times daily, hoping that qualifies me for this thread. I live in a sleepy town, in a particularly close-knit part of it where everyone knows everyone. One morning, I woke up feeling fine, drank my coffee, and walked to the door to let my cat out. As I closed the door, I saw a rather large man with no shirt run full speed into my neighbor's backyard and disappear behind the house. Obviously, this set off a panic in me. Why was he running? What was he doing in Brad's backyard at 7 a.m. half naked? The problem with delusions and hallucinations is that while you're having one, you are completely convinced it's real. There's no doubt. So even if the idea of a random person trespassing shirtless seems absurd now, at the time, I was absolutely determined to figure out who he was. The police ended up arresting me in Brad's backyard, screaming, ranting, in boxers and a bathrobe, insisting that a man who didn't exist was doing exactly what I was now doing. I know people expect horror stories or tales about ghosts or imaginary monsters, but to me, real horror is watching your entire town see you taken away as someone who's lost touch with reality, all while you genuinely believe you're helping. My biggest fear isn't some scary creature. It's that one day I won't be able to tell what's real anymore. Story 6. No diagnosis here, but I've been suffering from constant delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations for the past 2 years. The scariest hallucination I've ever had happened in a Target. I was in the canned food aisle when I saw a little girl grab a can. There was nothing particularly strange about it. At first I figured she was just helping her mom, but after a while of standing silently with the can in her hands, she turned around and stared at me, with empty eye sockets. She opened the can and started chasing me around the store with the lid. They're really sharp. And I ran, trying to get away. I know it sounds strange, but it felt incredibly real. Eventually I tripped, and the next thing I knew, she handed me the can lid and began controlling my arms. I felt myself cut my neck and wrists open and started screaming. Then I snapped out of it. When I came to, I was just standing there, staring at the cans, tears streaming down my face. It's the most vivid hallucination I've ever had, far scarier than the ones I deal with every day. Story 7. Not officially diagnosed with schizophrenia or anything similar, but I do frequently experience hallucinations. I probably should see someone, but they don't interfere with my daily life, so I've brushed them off. Years ago, a counselor told me that if the hallucinations aren't telling me to do anything, they aren't a big concern. That stuck with me. I feel like there's a difference between people who hallucinate and people whose hallucinations interact with them. Most of mine involve spiders crawling on the walls. Sometimes I'll glance over and see a giant spider or thousands of tiny ones crawling everywhere. Other times there's just one average-sized spider in the corner, surrounded by a web maze. It usually happens at night while I'm in bed or just waking up, so I assume it's connected to sleep somehow. Another frequent one is a specific pattern of knocks on my bedroom door. At first, these things really scared me. Giant spiders on the wall? No thank you. But over time, I've started to recognize the difference between reality and hallucination. The problem is, even though I know it's not real, I can still see it. My brain still tells me, hey, there's something here. You need to deal with it. And that's what's terrifying to me. These hallucinations are so vivid that they override any logic or reason. They make me act on things I know aren't real. If I heard someone knock right now, I'd go open the door. Even if I know there's no one there, I'd still get up and check. That's the scariest part. Why would I respond to something I know doesn't exist? Why grab bug spray for spiders I know aren't real? It makes me feel like I'm not in control of my own actions. And to me, that's far scarier than anything I could hallucinate. Story 8. Not schizophrenic, but I am bipolar, and was investigated for schizophrenia during the diagnostic process due to hallucinations. I initially heard what I thought was a broken radio both in my home and car for about 6 months. I had just moved into a new house with my then boyfriend, so I was quick to dismiss unfamiliar noises. However, I became 100% convinced that a couple was living in the garage and wanted to hurt me. I refused to ever go into the garage. The one time I did with my significant other, he noticed a door was open, and I sprinted away with the flashlight. I was midway through texting his mom that he was probably hurt when he walked back in, understandably upset. A few months later, I had the scariest night of my life. I had just broken up with that same partner for various reasons, including extreme paranoia and panic. After telling him it was over, I went to the bathroom to cry. I looked down and saw my entire body covered in spiders. I panicked. I couldn't go to him for help, so I returned to the spare room. An hour later, I heard two voices, about 20 centimeters behind my right shoulder, growl in unison. "It's coming!" Startled, I looked up and saw a tall, black figure in the corner of the room. Imagine the shape of a tall guard, but with a deeply ominous presence. I ran out of the room back to my partner, who understandably told me to leave. He has since apologized. He didn't know what was happening, just that I was acting erratically. I left the next day for 2 months. I moved back in when he moved out and have been relatively stable since. I often describe bipolar disorder as experiencing glimpses of other mental health conditions, but only temporarily. My doctors initially suspected schizophrenia when I was first admitted, and if what I experienced was even a fraction of the full condition, I am incredibly grateful that it wasn't the case. Story 9. I am in charge of a program at a mental health agency that serves individuals with chronic mental health conditions such as schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and many others. We run group homes where residents can work on life skills and participate in their communities to the best of their abilities. The individuals we serve have some of the most persistent and severe symptoms associated with their diagnoses. I've worked with clients who consistently see disturbing images, reflections in doorknobs and mirrors where they witness themselves being harmed. Others have paranoid hallucinations, like believing that a hospital implanted a listening device in their brain because they were convinced a certain doctor had hurt a family member. There are many distressing cases. On a lighter note, we provide services to a gentleman who frequently hallucinates that he owns a nightclub and interacts with his imagined staff. He regularly yells directives to them, including colorful and humorous phrases, as though he's managing a real business. It's moments like those that bring a strange mix of levity and humanity to very challenging work. Story 10. My great-grandmother passed away as a result of her hallucinations. I wasn't alive at the time, but the story has been passed down. She apparently didn't receive the care she needed and ended up living alone. She locked herself inside her home and was found deceased weeks later. She had believed people were trying to harm her, so she armed herself and became so afraid that she stopped moving, presumably until her health gave out. When her home was eventually cleaned, they discovered her legs were in a terrible state from immobility and lack of hygiene. Several bottles of alcohol had also been consumed. Even more disturbing was that they found dozens of purses she had apparently taken, none of which had been tampered with or emptied. To me, that's a horrifying way to go. So convinced you're in danger that you isolate yourself completely. My cousin, who is my age, also struggles with similar symptoms. She often believes she's more than human and frequently returns to the hospital during episodes. From what I understand, she hears and occasionally sees things she describes as spirits. She's had many struggles, including numerous crises that are incredibly heartbreaking. It's hard to maintain a close relationship because when she's in those states, she pushes others away, Even though she isn't afraid, she distances herself to the point of emotional collapse. I'm thankful that she has access to better treatment now. I truly hope she never ends up like our great-grandmother. Sometimes I wonder if I might have symptoms as well, though not nearly to that extent. Usually during manic swings associated with my bipolar disorder, I'll hear inaudible whispers or see fleeting motion in my peripheral vision. When it happens, it comes with an overwhelming sense of dread. Hearing whispers is one thing, but hearing them and being absolutely certain something bad is about to happen, that takes it to another level. Honestly, I know I should stop using substances like cannabis and psychedelics, especially given my family history. I'm aware I may be pushing limits I shouldn't. Story 11. I only have psychosis, so not full schizophrenia, but I still have hallucinations and delusions. I'm a woman, and to be honest, both of my worst experiences are pretty unbelievable because they sound so unusual compared to what you usually hear about in the media, etc. My worst hallucinations have actually been tactile, touch-based, so not quite what you're looking for. But there's a visual one at the end, which was very scary at the time. For the tactile ones, I get them a few times a year, but 2016 was the worst. They began in 2014, when something invisible would climb into bed with me and hold me from behind. It escalated from there and became more intrusive, but a round of antipsychotics got rid of them. In 2016, it came back intensely. I don't want to say it had physical relations with me because it's a hallucination, it's not real, and there was definitely nothing visible, but something did happen. It only occurred once, but for the next few days it started to touch me even outside the bedroom and during the day. One time, it pinned me against the sink while I was washing dishes. It kind of felt like a power play, like it was saying, "Look what I can do. I can reach you anywhere." Terrifying stuff. Another round of antipsychotics stopped it. I'm dreading the next flare-up. As for the visual, one night while walking home from class at university, I was hit by a sudden dizzy spell that distorted my vision. Then it felt like I was being pulled to look at the other side of the road, towards the woods. Standing there was what looked like Slender Man. Needless to say, I ran back to the house immediately and didn't sleep that night. That was probably the first moment I realized something wasn't right. The tactile hallucinations began again after I returned home at the end of the school year. The Slender Man case actually happened shortly after that hallucination. I think it may have been the same year, strangely enough. Story 12. Not me, but my aunt has paranoid schizophrenia. I don't know her scariest episode, but one in particular affected the whole family. After my grandpa died, her and my mom's father, she moved across the country to be near us and the rest of the siblings. One day she was supposed to come over, but she never showed up. My mom called her, and she said there was a tiger stalking her outside her house, and she couldn't leave because it would attack her. My mom tried to reason with her, saying that if a tiger had escaped the zoo, it would be all over the news and there would be police everywhere. That conversation turned into a huge fight. Afterward, my aunt packed up and moved back across the country without telling anyone. Story 13. Not me, but my ex-boyfriend. He was diagnosed at a young age but never medicated. Doctors said it wasn't severe enough to require treatment and assumed he would grow out of it. He told me his first hallucinations were auditory. Just people calling his name. He'd be in a crowd and hear a voice very close to him say his name. He'd turn around, but there was no one there. He was always hesitant to talk about the visual ones. I think the whole topic made him self-conscious. But once as a child, he saw dead people digging themselves out of the ground. He said it didn't scare him because he knew by then that they were hallucinations. I once asked him what his most vivid hallucination was. He said he was driving and saw hundreds of white rabbits run out onto the road. When cars hit them, the rabbits would turn into smoke. He said the hallucination lasted for quite a few miles. He never fully grew out of it. Once or twice, he would mention seeing twinkles when we were together. Tiny twinkling lights everywhere. It actually sounded kind of peaceful. Story 14. Hey everyone, Schizophrenic here. I'd rather not specify a particular subtype. I'm officially diagnosed with the paranoid kind, but I show symptoms of a few others as well from what I can tell. Either way, my scariest hallucinations are the ones that make me feel like the fabric of reality is falling apart. I have a few that fall into that category. The most common one, which scares me deeply, is when I see individual cells disappearing from existence, popping like bubbles with no new ones to replace them. I feel like reality itself is dissolving into some kind of liquid state. Everything feels magnified. I can see much more clearly during these episodes, which is odd because my medication usually blurs my vision. Another less frequent one is the sensation that everything in the universe is being drawn toward me involuntarily, absorbed into my body, with no way to escape. It feels like I've become a human black hole, which is terrifying, sad, and strangely calm all at once. Story 15. Not me, but a man I know. He told me that he was walking his bike past Goodwill when a group of teenagers bumped into him, stole his wallet, and then kidnapped him. All of the teens were celebrities, but he couldn't name them. He said they took him to the Flatiron Building in Seattle and spoke to him in the Tlingit Haida language from Alaskan indigenous tribes, keeping him for weeks and implanting an organic computer in his brain so that he no longer had to show ID at the casino. After that, he said he went to Las Vegas, where a dark figure took his hand and forced him into a manhole in the street, through a door that he believed led to hell. He blamed himself for that since he had chosen to visit Sin City. He was visibly distressed while recounting all this, especially the part about Vegas. Trying to be gentle, I asked him, "Now you know none of that really happened, right?" He just stared at me in confusion, because to him, all of it did happen. Story 16. Medicated paranoid schizophrenic here. Out of all the various recurring, excruciating delusions of pain, death, and extreme paranoia, few have scared me as much as this one. Buckle up, folks. I was awoken, the night sky lit by a half moon. Outside my window, possibly just a reflection, a face looked back at me. Bearded, helmeted, resembling those biker zombies from 7 Days to Die. Just to paint a picture. The face twisted, contorted, turned inside out, then back to normal. It looked like it was laughing, and then it started moving towards me, through the window. Now inside my bedroom, just inches away from me, laughing. I screamed silently, too afraid to make a sound, too terrified to blink. The face hovered, menacingly staring into my soul, and I could feel it tearing me apart. In a rare moment of clarity, I started praying to every god I knew. Jesus, Odin, Krishna, Osiris, begging for mercy, anything but this. The face then lost its features, turning into a skull. A warped blend of human and animal that's hard to describe. It had horns. It was terrifying, I thought. I knew. I was going to die. This laughing skull was going to destroy me. In a final act of torment, it crept closer, its stare burning into my eyes, shredding and scarring my mind with pure hatred. I closed my eyes for the first time in what felt like ages, and when I opened them, it was gone. Looking around, my alarm clock read 3:04 a.m. The half moon looked like a sideways frown, reminding me I was still in danger. That the face, the skull, had been sent here to harm me. I didn't sleep again for 2 days, and even then, I collapsed from exhaustion. That's the end of that memory. As painful as it is to relive, it reminds me why I take my meds, so I never have to be afraid of things like that again. Story 17. I'm late to this thread, but it's helpful talking about some of these experiences. I've had a recurring figure since my episodes first started. When I was younger, I'd hear brief whispered words like, "Hey," or "Look." The first time this particular voice turned into a visual sensation, I was about 13 years old. I was reading in bed when I heard a whisper saying, "Stop," and it repeated louder and louder until it became screaming. Slowly entering my vision was a woman in a white robe, with a disfigured, bloodied face and tangled hair. Once she was fully visible, the screaming stopped. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't look away. I was frozen in fear. My eyes watered endlessly. After a few minutes, I finally snapped out of it, and she was gone. I've had other episodes, but she remains one of my few recurring terrors. She's appeared in school, in class. While out with friends, I'd see her in the road. At work, she'd just be there. It's caused issues in relationships because I find it hard to admit what I go through. A month ago, I visited my ex-girlfriend at her dorm and woke up completely paralyzed by fear. I was mid-episode but couldn't reach out for help. Story 18. This thread interests me because I have a sibling who was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 18. It was very hard on my family, especially my mom, because we had no idea what was happening. Over the last 10 years, she's been in and out of mental health centers. Usually during episodes, she hallucinates that my mother is involved with her boyfriend, though she doesn't have one. She says she can hear them through the wall, and when this happens, she becomes very aggressive and has attempted to hurt our mom. What amazes and confuses me is how many people here talk about their condition and are self-aware enough to know their experiences weren't real, even if they realized it afterward. But my sibling insists there's nothing wrong with her. She believes we all hate her and just want her locked up. She's hallucinated voices speaking to her from the radio and even describe bizarre things, like sharks living in her stomach and harming an unborn baby, despite not being pregnant. I always wonder why she can't acknowledge her condition like others do. Sometimes I fear I might have symptoms too, though not nearly as extreme. During manic swings from my bipolar disorder, I sometimes hear or see things. It's never direct, just motion in my peripheral vision or inaudible whispers, but they come with a crushing fear of something terrible about to happen. Whispering is one thing. Whispering combined with absolute certainty that you're about to die, that adds a terrifying layer. Honestly, I know I should stop using cannabis and psychedelics. I'm aware this runs in my family and I might be playing with fire. Story 19. I have mixed-state bipolar disorder and Asperger's, which has sometimes led to full-blown psychosis. It's hard to separate hallucinations from synesthesia at times, but the result can be very intense. For example, once while on the ground floor of a hotel, I heard piano music coming from the lounge. As I got closer, the sound shifted, and I realized it was actually guitar and drums. I hear human voices in static, like in white noise from electronics. Even a loud light bulb can sound like two people arguing. When I close my eyes, I see fractals and kaleidoscopic imagery until it fades to black, followed by flashbulb-like visions of things I saw since I last slept. Certain sounds trigger vivid mental images, colors, shapes, emotions. During early psychosis, I once heard a commercial for Windows 10. The intro sound made me react so strongly I fell back like a cartoon character and started screaming because I saw 7 blinding lights crashing toward me. There are smaller, but still troubling hallucinations too, like being convinced every man on earth is trying to harm me, or interpreting a sign that said exit to lobby as something like leave before trying to advocate for anything, which left me mute while staring at the sign. Story 20. A demon appeared on the door to my balcony and said, "You can't help me. No one can help me." When I went back inside, it moved up the wall and onto the ceiling, then said it was coming back in 2 minutes to take me to hell. I began to feel a pulsing sensation move up my left arm, which made me think I was having a heart attack. It came back, and I was so terrified that I ran out of my apartment. What followed was a situation that, in real time, lasted only about 2 days. But in the delusion, it felt like 6 months. At some point during that night, the police tased me about 10 miles from my apartment, and my heart stopped. In the delusion, the demon had captured me and taken me to hell, where I was chained and being forced to smash my head into a glass wall. In reality, I was in someone's backyard trying to break through their sliding glass door. Apparently, the homeowner tried to defend themselves with a shotgun but missed. At one point in the delusion, I became too exhausted and fell to the ground. The demon kept telling me it would only get worse if I didn't keep going. But I had no energy, so I gave up. Then 2 zombie-like Dobermans came and devoured my body from the neck down until I was nothing but bones. I watched as my muscles and skin slowly regrew until I was whole again, and I was told to keep smashing the window with my head. When the glass finally broke, I fell onto the lower pane, which sliced me in half. Immediately, I was transported into a room that was unbearably hot. Every breath I took was a gasp, and I couldn't get any air. In front of me was someone holding a glass of water covered in condensation. I barely had the strength to crawl toward it. Every time I got close enough to touch it, the person stepped back. There was a clock on the wall, and I watched 6 months pass. The only thought in my head was, I am never getting out of here. No memories of family or my past, just endless despair. Eventually, I got close enough to touch the glass. When my fingers brushed it, I was transported to another place, a void. In that space stood a massive black dragon with glowing green eyes. The undersides of its wings were the same bright green. It moved its enormous head toward me. Its size was 3 times larger than my whole body, and whispered, "It is only going to get worse from here." Then it blew black smoke from its nostrils, which entered my ear. What happened next is impossible to describe, but I'll try. Imagine having 5,000 versions of yourself, and each one is experiencing the most unbearable, mind-splitting migraine you can imagine, all happening simultaneously inside your own mind. I lost all sense of existence in that pain. Then I was in space, staring at the Earth, and I heard my own voice say, "You created all of this." When I finally woke up, I was strapped into a hospital bed in the ICU. I looked like someone who had been dragged behind a car, just covered in gashes and wounds. For a long time, I was completely traumatized. But those last words, "You created all of this," ended up changing my life. I now believe that our reality is created by our own minds. And knowing that, I no longer fear anything. I think that when people die, they release a massive amount of DMT, which causes a time-dilated dream state. Depending on what you're thinking at the moment of death, in my case, thoughts of hell, that's what you experience. From the time I saw the demon to the moment I woke up, only 2 days had passed. But in my mind, I had spent 6 months in hell. I have another story from more recently, and I'll share it here if anyone wants to hear it. Story 21. The second one happened 3 years later. I had come to terms with what happened the first time and hadn't had anything too severe in a long while. I was dating someone I truly cared about. We were looking at rings. I had a dog and a nice apartment in Southern California near the beach. Life was really good. I work in TV and do a lot of photography, so I had this little 3-legged tripod with flexible legs that could wrap around poles and other objects. One day I was sitting on the couch watching TV and the tripod started talking to me. My body felt like if I gave up control, it would move on instinct. It picked up the tripod and shaped the legs so that I was staring at a little humanoid figure with a couple of arms and one leg. It said its name was Ishvanallah, and that I had already lived this life 1,000 times. It was here so I could begin my training. Every so often, my arms would move the tripod, and I'd end up intricately shaping different versions of the figure in poses that perfectly aligned with what it was telling me. At one point, it shifted and pointed to the door and told me my girlfriend was about to walk in and that I needed to act natural. 1 second later, she came in. At this point, the being was commenting psychically on events as they were unfolding in real time. It said it was preparing me for the arrival of a dragon-like race from outer space that would destroy Earth. It showed me visions of a massive starship I was going to captain, where my dog would have a spot on the bridge, and my future wife, my co-captain, would sit. Then it showed me the destruction of Earth and the faces of countless people suffering. I asked how I could save them. It said I'd be given the necessary abilities to escape, along with my dog and my girlfriend. I must have had a strange look on my face because my girlfriend asked what was going on. Ishvanallah warned me not to say anything and insisted I keep her inside the apartment. He showed me a vision of her parents' house engulfed in flames and told me that if she left to go there, she would die. Not a second later, she said she didn't know what was going on and that she was going to spend the night at her parents'. I mentally asked how to stop her, and he told me this timeline had happened before, and that the only way to save her was to put her in a rear naked choke until she passed out and tie her up until morning. My mind reeled. I'm not a violent person. I loved her deeply and would never intentionally harm her. But the being insisted, she'll be scared and angry, but when it's over, she'll thank you and love you forever. What happened next will haunt me forever. I walked up behind her in the kitchen and said, "I love you, and I promise you'll forgive me when it's all over." I'm much stronger than her and have a background in MMA, so it wasn't difficult. When she passed out, I moved to get some rope, but she regained consciousness and started screaming at the top of her lungs. I managed to subdue her again, crying, panicking, trying to explain, "I'm doing this because I love you. Please understand." Then Ish said, "Let me handle it." My body moved on its own. I began chanting what I believed was some kind of incantation, saying, "Watch, I'll show you." My ex, incredibly smart and quick, stopped struggling and looked into my eyes. She said, "I saw it. I saw everything." I was so relieved. I let her up and started walking toward the room, saying, "Thank God, come on, we have to." I heard the sliding glass door open. She had jumped off the second-story balcony and was running through the neighborhood, yelling for help. I ran down the stairs. Neighbors had come out, 3 men and a couple of women. Ish said, "They don't matter. They're going to die anyway. If you don't get her back, she will too." I had already crossed a line I could never uncross, and in my mind, I was trying to save her. I felt completely overtaken by something I still can't explain. I came at the 3 men, and what followed was like something out of a movie. I spun through the air, struck one with a backhand, continued the motion to hit the second, and landed a head kick. I pivoted on my heel and elbowed the third. It all happened in about 2 seconds. They were incapacitated. My ex ran off with one of the women and locked themselves in a nearby apartment. Ish told me I'd get another chance. But first I had to avoid being caught. He told me to go back, grab clothes and my bowler hat. I left the apartment with my dog, well trained, and began hearing sirens. I tried to put on shoes, but Ish insisted I leave them behind so I could move more quietly. What followed was a sequence of extremely specific instructions: when to move, when to hide, how to avoid foot patrols, and 6 police cruisers now circling the neighborhood. The police station was just blocks away. After 20 minutes, I finally made it to the exit of my complex and casually walked out. A patrol car passed as I exited. I continued left behind the grocery store and asked Ish what to do next. He said the only way to save her in this timeline was to let the police arrest me. The attack would begin during the ride to jail, and I'd be able to escape. So I waited. When the police arrived, I offered no resistance. They cuffed me and put me in the back of the car. I was completely calm. Ish told me to dismantle the seat belts and secure myself for the car's inevitable crash. He said I'd survive but be badly injured. With my hands behind my back, Ish guided me through dismantling the restraints with some kind of muscle memory I didn't know I had. It was like a Houdini act. Once we started driving, I told the officer about the impending attack and said he needed to get off the planet. I began hearing explosions and screams, though I couldn't see anything. I was curled up in the back seat, trying to brace for impact. Eventually, we arrived at the station. They found the tripod on me and took it away. The voice of Ish was gone, but I still believed the attack would start and I could escape. I refused a phone call. I figured there was no point. Everything was about to end anyway. But then I picked up the phone in my cell and my ex was on the line. She said she was safe, that the space crew had come to get her, and that we'd be reunited soon. That phone call and everything else was part of the delusion. Hours passed. I was moved into general population. Slowly I realized what I had done, that none of it was real. Eventually I was allowed another phone call. I called her. She picked up. She told me it was over and that she forgave me because she knew that wasn't really me. I never saw her again. I never saw my dog again. When I got out of jail, I packed everything and moved across the country, trying to start over. But everything reminds me of her, of that moment when I stood behind the woman I loved, thinking I was saving her, when in reality, I was destroying everything beautiful in my life. The first experience is easier to talk about. It's like the brain only has room for one kind of trauma, and this one replaced the last. But just the sight or thought of anything we once shared brings back the entire night. I've done my best not to give up entirely. I want to make amends, but I can't. There's a restraining order. I can't even say I'm sorry. Not that it would matter. She would probably just be afraid at the sight of me. The worst part is feeling like I don't deserve to love or be loved again after the harm I caused. The person I became that night thought he was a hero, but became something terrifying. The mind is a powerful thing. Story 22. I started experiencing hallucinations in high school. Since I had never questioned my mental soundness before, I assumed everything I heard was real. It didn't help that I was raised Catholic and already held some underlying beliefs about the existence of demons and similar entities. It began with faint whispers in the background. I thought they were just internal thoughts I wasn't actively focusing on. At first, the whispers made me feel like I was an outcast, that my friends were against me, and that I was completely alone. As absurd as it sounds, after hearing it repeatedly, I started to believe it. It completely altered my behavior. I began to doubt everyone around me and isolate myself, convinced they were conspiring against me or faking their friendship. That's how hallucinations initially affected me. But the scariest thing I ever heard came later. After maybe a year of not talking to anyone about the whispers, things escalated. I became even more isolated, sometimes going weeks without speaking to anyone. I fully believed I was hated. The whispers were my only constant companions, and by then I had come to view them as a subconscious form of insight, revealing truths I wasn't able to see. Then suddenly the whispers turned into inhuman voices, booming, bone-chilling, and commanding. They told me they were of a different nature, a higher one, and that they now had ownership over me. They said I was a pawn to them, but that my status as an outcast made them feel sympathy. I was told I needed to be reintroduced into society, and the only way to do that was to eliminate the people who didn't like me. In my mind, the logical source of all this hate was my former crush. According to them, by ending her life, I would silence the person who was supposedly spreading negativity about me. At the time, I was still somewhat grounded, so I recognized that these suggestions were wrong. But like I explained earlier, hearing something over and over can start to make it seem rational. As an extrovert desperate to feel safe around people again, I began to see harming this girl as a necessary evil. I had a plan, but before I could carry it out, I sent her a strange text that concerned her. She contacted a hospital and shared her concerns about my mental state. An ambulance and a police officer arrived at my house moments before I left, knife in hand. Looking back after treatment, that was by far the scariest experience I've ever had. Story 23. My first visual hallucination happened when I was 14 and still undiagnosed. I was up late talking to a friend on the phone when I heard tapping on my window. I looked over and saw a completely glowing white hand making strange gestures and grabbing at the air. I freaked out and ran downstairs, telling my parents that someone was trying to break into the house. Here's the terrifying part. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor. My dad still went outside to check but brushed it off as a nightmare. I also suffer from night terrors. When I returned to my room, things were calm for a while. Then about an hour later, the hand came back. But this time, it was violently flailing, like its body was being shaken uncontrollably. I slept in the bathroom that night. Months later, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar 1. I eventually looked back on that night and realized it was a hallucination. But the one that really broke me happened after I had an abortion. At first, I was emotionally okay with the decision because I was battling a severe alcohol addiction and my family has a long history of postpartum psychosis. I had read too many articles about mothers going through it and hurting themselves or their children. I was, and still am, convinced that having a child would put me at serious risk. It's not something I'm willing to gamble with. But 2 nights after the procedure, I was alone in my apartment when I heard faint crying. It was 2 a.m., and I figured it might be a cat or child outside. I went to the window and saw nothing. Then right behind me, I heard a small voice whisper, "Mommy?" I spun around and saw a flash, like a camera, of a little girl in red with short black hair. It lasted a second and was gone. I stood there in shock, then broke down crying. That hallucination still haunts me. I felt enormous guilt and self-hatred afterward, but I keep trying to remind myself that it was the right decision. I'm now on Rexulti, which has helped a lot. I haven't had hallucinations in a while and feel more stable than ever before. Story 24. I had a very close friend who was schizophrenic. I knew he went to the mall a lot, but I never thought much of it. One day when he was having a good day, I asked him what he did there. He told me he'd walk around the mall with his headphones on, listening to music, and watching people's mouths. He believed that God was sending him messages through the way people's mouths moved. It wasn't actual lip reading, it was his hallucinations. He thought each message was tied to something in his life, helping him make decisions or reinforcing his delusions. I'm sure it was even more complex than I could ever understand, but he fully believed it was real. Tragically, he passed away last year. He walked off the roof of the group home where he was staying. He believed God had given him the ability to fly. As heartbreaking as it is, part of me finds peace knowing that he's finally free from his mind, and I hope he's at peace now. Story 25. I don't have schizophrenia, but I have experienced some really scary hallucinations before. I do have bipolar disorder, and when I used to drink heavily, I would hear strange voices and noises at night while trying to fall asleep. When I closed my eyes, a disturbing slideshow would play in my head. Images of people with burnt faces, monsters, and grotesque, inhuman facial features and expressions. After I stopped drinking, I tried smoking weed. Turns out that was a terrible idea. I became extremely paranoid, and one night I heard a noise in my house that made me convinced someone had broken in. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but I was still terrified. When I tried to sleep, I started hearing a loud screeching or squeaking noise from the corner of my room. I also had visual hallucinations. I have a poster of Jimi Hendrix in my room, and I hallucinated that he was morphing out of the poster and coming to life. Before anyone says the weed was laced, it wasn't. It was medical from my girlfriend's cousin. So no, it wasn't dipped in anything like PCP. Not super scary, but I've also hallucinated a large black chicken running down the street. One time I woke up to what sounded like a chorus of women repeatedly singing the phrase, "I will double." I've also experienced weird paranoia, feeling like someone is behind me. When standing in line at 7-Eleven or fast food places, I've turned around believing someone was there, only to find no one at all. I've also had some intense nightmares over the years, but that's a different story. Just last night, I dreamed I was hit in the leg by a stray bullet from a police shooting, so that gives you some idea of how vivid my dreams can be. P.S. One of the things that makes hallucinations so terrifying is not knowing what will happen next. My biggest fear was that I'd hear someone talking to me or telling me to do something. After your first hallucination, you start thinking, oh no, what's next? It's like being stuck in a horror movie you can't escape. Story 26. OP, this is a great question, and I noticed no one was answering yet, so I'll share something. First off, schizophrenia is the scariest illness in the world. If a higher power came to me and said I had to choose a disease, I would say anything but schizophrenia. It's just that awful. I have nothing but compassion for those who have it and for the families dealing with it. That said, here's my story. Back when I worked in social services, I had a client with paranoid schizophrenia. He was extremely intelligent, did great in college, went to graduate school, top of his class. Around age 25, he began to develop paranoia and hallucinations, believing people were watching him and trying to control him. By the time he became my client, he had very little left. He lived in a small shack in the woods. I went to check on him once, and he was extremely upset because he believed the airplanes flying overhead, he lived near an airport, were part of a government operation trying to control him. He still wore the college ring he had earned graduating with honors. He looked at it and said, I don't understand what this ring is for. I don't remember. Despite all he had accomplished, despite his intelligence and potential, what remained was only a shadow of that person. Now he was a man barely holding on, afraid to take his medications, with no memory of his former life, and no family to help him. It was heartbreaking and truly frightening. I still think about him and wonder what happened to him. Story 27. My mom has schizophrenia. She once called me during a hallucination. She was out for a walk and lived down the road from a military surplus store. It sold old uniforms, dummy grenades, and similar stuff. Outside, they had mannequins dressed as soldiers and an old cannon. Across the road, there was a billboard for the local news station. So she's walking past the store, and suddenly she hears gunfire. She sees the mannequins come to life. They're shooting at her and preparing to fire the cannon. She panics and starts running. Then she looks up at the billboard, and the newscasters in the ad are holding guns, also trying to harm her. She called me during all of this, and it scared me to death. I thought she was really in danger. She ended up getting into a taxi during the call and was admitted to a psychiatric facility for several days, maybe a week. I can't remember exactly. It was about 15 years ago. I'm not sure if that's the scariest hallucination she's had, but most of them involve people trying to harm her or plot against her. One time she heard someone on TV say, "Headshot at 12 o'clock." And from that moment on, she avoided sitting in front of windows around noon and midnight because she believed it was a warning that someone would try to shoot her at exactly 12 o'clock. She also often saw snakes. One time I sent her a photo of my daughter, who was just old enough to eat baby food. She had carrot baby food on her face while sitting in her high chair. My mom called me crying because to her it looked like a picture of my daughter dead, with blood around her mouth and a snake wrapped around her neck. Story 28. I thought I was chosen by God, or the devil. I saw all the mistakes and bad things I'd done in my life and believed I had to pay for them. This led to me walking aimlessly around a town I knew like the back of my hand, yet somehow getting completely lost. It felt like I was walking in circles. I met some random people and had a beer or two with them. Things got fuzzy. I ended up in jail for the weekend. I thought the whole thing was a setup. Humanity and God or the devil trying to break me. I gave the police fake information because I didn't have my wallet or ID. Later, I found out I had walked into a woman's house and tried to do laundry, and that's why I was arrested. I must have also been aggressive with the cops because I was charged with obstructing an officer. My parents bailed me out after filing a missing person report. I was still off medication and experiencing hallucinations and delusions for another week. More religious visions, mixed with conspiracy theories and aliens. Eventually, I became convinced that the only way to atone for my sins was to sacrifice myself for Jesus so he could live again. I tried to cut my wrists multiple times with an X-Acto blade, but for some reason I couldn't cut deep enough. I bled a lot, but didn't end up hospitalized. I got my prescriptions the next day, I think. Things started to mellow out, though I was still having paranoid thoughts and strange religious ideas. Things are more stable now, a couple of weeks later, but I'm still a bit shaken up about it. My usual thoughts lean toward conspiracy theories anyway, so even medicated, it can be tough. I'm just glad I'm not dead. Here's hoping it never happens again. Story 29. I'm not schizophrenic, but I went through postpartum psychosis 3 months after having my son. It started with auditory hallucinations. I would hear my son crying when he wasn't. I'd stare at the baby monitor and see no sound waves, but I could still hear him screaming. I knew it wasn't real, but that didn't make it any less distressing. After about 4 days, the hallucinations became visual. I would see people vandalizing the car I was sitting in, though when I got out, there were no marks. I was sure someone was hiding from me. There were also disturbing hallucinations involving my mother and inappropriate items, which I still can't talk about. Eventually, I started hallucinating that my brother was speaking to his girlfriend and saying things that triggered me. That led to me unintentionally telling my parents about past abuse I had never spoken of before. When I couldn't take it anymore, I went for a walk and became convinced my son's father was stalking me in the neighborhood. I even asked a neighbor to call 911. I'm really sorry, kind older man. That was the final straw. I asked to be taken to the ER. While I was there, I became convinced again that my son's father was coming to get me. The last thing I remember is telling the nurse I had taken a narcotic, which I hadn't. I hallucinated that too. Apparently, I attacked the nurses, bit one, and ripped out her earring. I am so sorry for that. Just thinking about this and writing it brings back all the guilt I felt after being released from the facility. If anyone recognizes these events, please know how deeply sorry I am. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in 3 months, and for the last few days before this all happened, I hadn't slept at all. Please take care of yourselves after having a baby. It can take a serious toll on your mental health. It's been 2 years now, and I'm doing a million times better. But they say it can get worse with each child, so I don't think I'll be having any more. Story 30. I'm schizophrenic. The illness manifests in so many ways. I'm not ashamed of my diagnosis. In fact, I'm thankful for it. I guess I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I just see things differently. When I was young, I used to see beautiful angels. They protected me from the demons trying to get in through the windows. You know when you're a kid and you run up the stairs after getting a snack in the middle of the night to avoid the ghosts downstairs? My angels were always there to protect me from the scary things outside. I was never afraid to go outside, but I was nervous about opening the door and letting those ugly creatures in. The spirits followed me outside too. When I felt uneasy, I'd see one of them. A woman in a white dress, her face so smooth and kind. She radiated love. I don't see them often now, but when I do, it feels like a tight, warm hug. Just pure energy, like love. During my teenage years, hormones made everything worse. I'd hear classmates talking and think they were whispering about me. I'd confront them, telling them to say it to my face, but they'd have no idea what I was talking about. I also smoked a lot of weed back then, which made the voices louder. I thought even my teacher was talking behind my back. I started seeing tall, faceless figures, shadow-like beings that followed me everywhere. But the angels protected me. They didn't usually appear during the day, but at night they formed a shield around me. In daily life, I'd feel kisses on my neck from invisible sources, bugs crawling in my hair, which made me scratch until my scalp bled. When I closed my eyes, I'd see vivid images of demons. I didn't sleep much as a teen. I felt like I was losing my mind. I got caught talking to myself a lot. I still do. It's just that some of my voices are honestly kind of funny. Now that I'm an adult, I know I'm not what people call normal. I take medication, which helps, but I'll never be a typical person. In some ways, I don't like taking my meds. I don't miss the demons or the dark spirits, but I do miss the angels. I miss the voices that made me laugh. When you take meds, there's always the chance you won't hallucinate anymore, or you'll get worse ones. I used to be so artistic before the meds. I could lose myself in painting or get swept up in a song. Now the days just feel gray and repetitive. I no longer live in fear of being chased by a demon, but I also feel like I've lost the angels who used to keep me safe. It's strange. My schizophrenia made me feel both vulnerable and protected. Now, without those hallucinations, I feel exposed. I think my brain created those visions to help me survive trauma. Now that shield is gone, and I'm left face to face with reality, which I don't always understand. I've been told I live in another world and I believe them, but that world feels more real than this one. After writing all this, I think I might stop taking my meds again. I love who I am, even the part of me that's a schizophrenic. Story 31. My mother is schizophrenic. When I was 16, she didn't want me to get my driver's license because she believed my father was in the mafia and would have me run off the road. He wasn't. She used to make me beat the couch she was sleeping on with a broomstick to scare off the possums she believed were making too much noise and keeping her from sleeping. One time, she told me I was being very rude. When I asked what she meant, she explained that I had flown from a town 30 miles away as a vampire bat, come in through the window, and turned into a goat. According to her, I wouldn't stop making goat boy noises at her until she gave me a Coke can to eat. She was genuinely upset and said she had raised me better than that. A million moments like these happened while I was growing up, but those are the ones that always stood out to me when people asked what it was like growing up with a schizophrenic parent. Story 32. I had an episode of psychosis in my early 20s. I believe it was acute, not chronic. It happened during a full moon. I was at home still living with my parents, and I've always had an intense fear of werewolves. I didn't actually see one, but I knew there was a werewolf lurking outside and that it would kill me if I stepped out. It was like I could hear its voice in my mind, some sort of mental message. Because I've always had irrational nighttime paranoia, I tried to dismiss it. The next day I felt a presence again, but this time it was clearer, a man's voice. He told me he was a werewolf and was hunting me. He said he'd follow me until the next full moon, when he would finally track me down, even if I tried to hide, and kill me. I'd had strange experiences before, so I tried to ignore it. But an overwhelming sense of dread began to build as the days passed and the next full moon approached. I told my girlfriend, now my wife, about it, and she tried to help me get through each day. I avoided going out at night because I knew he was stalking me. I felt more vulnerable after dark, when there were fewer people around. Then it got worse. I swear I kept seeing this same man at the grocery store, a restaurant, even the mall. It wasn't every day, but I saw him 5 to 6 times over the next 3 weeks. Every time we'd make eye contact for far too long. Eventually, I was convinced this man was the werewolf following me even in the daytime. I could usually function during the day, but by nightfall, the paranoia and dread took over. Finally, on the night of the full moon, I was completely consumed. Delusional, manic, paranoid, anxious. I dropped my girlfriend off before dark and took more over-the-counter antihistamines than I should have, hoping to sleep through the night and end this nightmare. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had survived something immense. The light seemed brighter. The darkness no longer felt threatening. The paranoia disappeared. My wife remembers the episode as me working myself into a frenzy, but she doesn't understand how real it all felt. Even now, when I think about it, I can still see the man who wasn't really there, staring at me in the grocery store.